We're here to become a mission force.
Yeah.
And not just be a mission field for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
Where we're always receiving and always taking, but when the mission idea is what we've received, now we're freely giving.
Yeah.
It's the Abrahamic covenant of, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless you beyond what you could ever imagine, but there's a reason. So you can be a blessing to the nations.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for joining us for this podcast. I think you're really going to enjoy this today. My special guest, Pastor Steve Murrell, Dr. Steve Murrell.
Oh, don't
Steve,
do that.
it's so great to have you here. Thank you for coming for our Presence Conference this year and imparting to us. Steve and I have been friends for many years, and I remember coming down to see you in the Philippines and hanging with you guys and you and Deborah and your three boys. And one of my earliest, greatest memories was I got to your apartment and the boys had just gotten some fighting spiders.
All right.
And
okay.
they had all these spiders, and they were manipulating them with chopsticks.
I'm sure they got them from our next door neighbors, the Bonifacios.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
So that's one of my greatest.
Who needs toys when you have spiders out
That's
there?
right.
Yeah.
It was really, really fun. Steve, you're the president of Every Nation Churches and Ministries globally. And, you guys are planting churches and invading college campuses all over the world and doing some amazing work. And I just appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Joe, it's an honor to be here. And really enjoyed the Presence Conference this week. And it's well named.
Yeah.
There was such a sense of the presence of God last night. And I thought back to the first time I walked in that building, which how many years ago was that when that was?
1998.
Okay. And it sure looked different.
Yeah.
And needed a lot of work.
Yeah.
But wow, the presence of God. And I remember years ago, the spirit of prayer that was in when this church, when Trinity Church was just weeks and months old.
Yeah.
The house of prayer for all nations concept.
Yeah.
And now you roll that decades later and all of that prayer. Well, for me, walking in there last night, there was just such a tangible sense of the presence of God. And it was an honor to be a part. And I was telling whoever the music director was, it was so refreshing to see such excellence minus entertainment.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, nobody's trying to get the spotlight. This was really all about Jesus, and I really appreciate how just the atmosphere, just the culture, and such a Christ-centered, God-honoring, not just conference, but the whole church and what's going on here. So anyway, honored to be here.
Thank you.
Great to be a part.
Thank you. Steve, we've been doing this every year since 1995.
Mm-hmm.
Take the first week or so of the new year and seek the Lord together as a congregation. It ends up being really the core of your church.
Yeah.
And but it's a great time to refresh and reset. When you're in the ministry and you come through, the end of November all the way through Christmas, you're ready really to take a break. And but we've always taken that first week of January and to really seek the Lord, worship the Lord, get a word for the year. And one of the themes I felt like the Lord, actually the theme, I felt like the Lord has given us, not just for this year, but I think moving into the whole next season, is making disciples and the power of God.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's so much good music out there now. There's so much good worship out there now. We need to take the next step, I think, as a church and believe for, pray for, expect the power of God to move. People to be healed, delivered, set free, marriages to be put back together, and create a community where people can know and be known. So that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And to have you here and put the exclamation point on the end of our conference was just a thrill.
Yeah, and I think I love that you're talking about discipleship and the power of God. Yeah. And I thought about coming into this that it was just before not 911. I thought about, let me go back to that.
Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that you're putting those two together, discipleship and the power of God. And when I saw the theme and what you guys were looking for, I went back to just before Y2K, and I was sitting in a meeting in Singapore with apostolic leaders from all over the world. I mean, some of the most impressive people I've been around. In those days, in that kind of moment, I was one of the youngest people in the room, maybe the youngest. And the convener of this apostolic gathering said, "What is God saying for the next year?" So you remember all the Y2K craze.
Yeah.
And people went around, and some of them it's like, wow, that was brilliant. I need to write that down. Others were like, that was the craziest thing I've ever heard of. Yeah. It's like, well, do you read your Bible? It was all over the place. And so it's going around, and most of it was really profound and really words from the Lord. And they were all different. Yeah. And I think because they were from different continents, and there were people from Nigeria, there were people from Brazil, there were leaders from Germany, and they were all over. In fact, that's where I met Phil Pringle at that meeting, because we were the only ones wearing jeans and T-shirts and sneakers. Everybody else was all suited up. But when it got to me, I said something like this. I said, I think what God's saying, at least to me in the movement I'm in and the churches that I'm a part of, is the same thing. It's not just unique to 1999. I said, I think he's saying the same thing he said in the year 99, the same thing he said in the year 999, and it's go make disciples of all nations. Yeah, it's called to discipleship, and part of that is bringing the power of God. And when Jesus sent his disciples out, it wasn't just to teach and preach. That was core of it, but it was also breaking demonic strongholds in people's lives, and it was also healing the sick, and it was so more than just this small thing. So I love that you're starting the year with that focus. And I think it's, I know there are unique, peculiar words for different times and people and moments and places. I leave that more to the prophetic people. But for me, it's always go make disciples of all nations. And
Steve, I remember you used to talk about, taking your boys to tennis camp, tennis lessons. Yeah. And their instructor, obviously very good because all three of your boys played in college, but their instructor would tell you that we get out there and practice the same old boring strokes. That stuck in my mind. And I wished I had heeded that earlier in my life. I was one of those prophetic guys. Every year you got kind of a new word, but the consistency of the word that you have lived on and led from has produced amazing fruit. And so, I know your story, but those people that are listening probably don't or may not. Why don't you tell a little bit about your story, about the miracle in Manila, about, how you got from a college sophomore at Mississippi State University to where you are today. I'd love to hear that story.
Joe, I just finished a book that is in the final copy editing stages right now, because 2024 is the 40th year anniversary of the church we were able to be a part of starting and leading in the Philippines. And hard to believe, 40 years. I don't know when or how I got so old. And that book is 40 sayings. 40 different sayings that for the new generations and the next generations, if you're going to understand the mission and the culture and how the church was formed and what it's doing. And so they're short chapters trying to explain things like same old boring strokes, things like from every nation to every nation. Just various ones. Discipleship is relationship, and all of these phrases. It was a joy writing. It was one of the. It was the quickest. I wrote it in a couple of months, and it was the most fun. Required no research. It was all my perspective on the stories that created the sayings. But when I think about that same old boring strokes, my sons and I, my wife, were watching the Australian Open a few years ago. It was a little-known American player, Tennis Sangren. He bounced around in the top 100, then he hit the top 40 for a while and had some injuries. And he's from Tennessee, and his actually first name is Tennis. And my youngest son trained with him when they were in high school, when we were going back and forth, and his mom coached him. And I'm watching him in the quarters of the Australian Open, knowing predicting each serve.
Wow.
And I'm remembering sitting watching with my son how his mom coached them serving wide. So I knew exactly. And then when they start cheating over, then you're going down the tee.
Yeah.
And it was this pattern that took him to that level of tennis. And obviously my son played in college, but he didn't get that far. And it was interesting, and it went back to that phrase that when my sons were young, when they were first starting tennis, they had a coach named Tom, who was a Canadian.
Yeah.
And in those days, everybody tried to be like Federer, and the young Federer and Nadal. Those were the guys in their early ages, beginning of their careers. And every time one of my sons would try to hit a shot that they saw on television, Coach Tom would stop the practice, and he would go, same old boring strokes. Don't try that. You're not Federer. You'll never be Federer. You're not Nadal. You'll never be Nadal. They will make that 50% of the time. You will make it 1 out of 100. Don't even try it. And he taught them what he kept calling the same old boring strokes. And for us, that has always been engage the lost with the gospel, establish biblical foundations, equip every believer to do ministry, and empower every disciple to make disciples. The 4 E's. Engage, establish, equip, empower, engage. That's the same old boring strokes. In tennis, it was the stroke was up, down, up to create topspin. For discipleship, it was engage the lost with the gospel, establish biblical foundations, equip people to do ministry, empower disciples to make disciples. That is what creates momentum in the spirit. And that's what advances the gospel into neighborhoods and campuses and communities, and no matter where you are in the world, that's what expands the gospel. So that was one of those phrases that we talked about.
And it's almost like it builds a natural pipeline for new leaders too, right?
Absolutely.
Those guys that excel in engaging in the community, those guys that excel in establishing the word in people's lives. And that's the amazing thing about it. But it's the consistency, that being consistent with. It's a discipline. And Steve, you've been a master at that. It's amazing.
Well, we fortunately were blessed with circumstances that pushed us to do leadership in a way that I probably wouldn't have done it had I been in the States. But it sort of forced us into doing something that, looking back, seemed really brilliant, but it wasn't. We just didn't know what else to do. So part of it, we were so ill-equipped. We knew how to do one thing, which was make disciples in small groups. When we went to the Philippines in 1984, it was a 1-month mission trip. My college buddy, Rice Brooks, was taking a summer mission. I had a big group, and he called me in May of 1984 and said, hey, Steve, usually these mission trips, we have about 15 people, but 60 people have signed up. I don't know this is too big to handle. Can you and Deborah come and help us manage this team? So, you get a big team like that on a mission trip. You've done mission trips. 1/3 are tourists. 1/3 are really in it for the gospel. And they're disciple makers. And 1/3 want to be, but they don't have a clue what they're doing. So we were working with that team, and it was a wonderful team. And I think even the tourists turned into gospel ministers. But we had 6 weeks to raise the support and get there. And so after that month, so many Filipinos had responded to the gospel. Deborah and I felt compelled to stay an extra month when the team left to help with follow-up and establishing people in the faith. And that month turned into 2 months, and then 3 months, and then 6 months, and then 2 decades, and that kind of thing. But we always thought we were about to leave. For the first 10 years that we were there, we thought we're leaving soon. But then we accidentally stumbled into multi-site. By 1986, we had 2 different locations, and every few years, we would outgrow a place, and I didn't know what to do, so we would just get another place and then turn that over to a Filipino, then I would start over. And so I became sort of an accidental church planner with an accidental multi-site model. I wish there were models I could have looked at and learned from. We just did it by making all the mistakes that hopefully others could learn from. But I think because we thought we were temporary, we quickly empowered young believers. We quickly empowered young Filipinos because we said, we're leaving soon.
Yeah.
So this is your church. But if I had a long-term mentality, I probably wouldn't have been as focused on leadership development.
Yeah.
And I probably would have had a mentality of, you're not quite ready yet.
Yeah.
Because I would have had
slower
the luxury
about
of
handing
time.
over the reins to people.
Yes, and
Yeah.
by doing it, it matured them. But I am certain we made more mistakes than any other church in the history of the Philippines
Yeah.
because of empowering, seemingly by necessity.
Yeah.
So I look back on it, and I'm grateful the way God put us in a situation, keeping us ignorant as to how long we would be there, forcing us in a leadership methodology that may not have been the best.
Yeah.
But looking back, it worked.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an amazing. I mean, you were really pioneering that strategy without knowing that you were pioneering a strategy.
And I remember the first time we got a second location, all the people, a small group of people older than me who were ministry veterans and spiritual fathers and people I deeply respected, 100% of them said, this is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
This is not going to work. You can't preach at this place in the morning and drive 30, 40 minutes and preach at another. You can't do that.
Yeah.
I said, but I have to. There's no more room there, and we can't find another place. This is the only place, and a bunch of kids got saved here, and I don't have a choice. Yeah. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
So that went on for years, but then it kind of became a thing later. I'm sure others were doing it. I don't think we were the first by any means. I wish I had known who was doing it.
Yeah.
Because I could have learned instead
notes.
of just making every mistake you could make. But and then that it put us in a position of empowering Filipinos to really own the church.
Yeah.
Not own like a deed, but really it's theirs. And then I'm temporary, I move on. And then that did eventually become a strategic pattern.
Yeah.
Where we started new and now we're 18 locations in Metro Manila. One church, but 18 locations.
And Steve, one of the amazing things where you moved into a flat right next to Joey Bonifacio and his family, right? I mean,
that was when we were in a neighborhood before I got the flat where you saw. But we were next door neighbors for 10 years. So he has 3 sons, I have 3 sons, and they grew up together. Yeah.
And was he saved when you met him?
Oh yeah, he was a brand new Christian. And it was kind of a funny story because it was probably 86. We started in the university belt in downtown Manila, and then we moved. The second location was in the business district, simply because a lot of students lived in that area, and they got saved on some of the exclusive campuses. But Joey came into a meeting. So our Deborah and I are 25 and 23 at the time, and we're all students. We're the oldest people in the church, and I think we may have been maybe one other married couple. It was a bunch of students, and Joey and Marie were new believers, and they had their youngest son was the same age as mine. They were within a week apart, their births, and so they're, hand-carried babies. And they looked around and thought, this is a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
And they left saying, we'll never come back. But we were in a different location a few months later, and they heard about this, and they walked in and go, that's that same American guy preaching.
Yeah.
And we became friends. They became really pillars in the church. When it was mostly students.
Yeah.
High school and college kids.
Yeah. Now, you talked about the U-Belt.
Yeah.
Some people might not be familiar. I mean, it's a place in Manila where there are multiple universities, right?
Yes. It's downtown Manila. I don't know. There's probably at least 15 universities within a few mile radius. So everywhere you turn is another campus. And some of those campuses have 40,000 students. Some will have 8,000 students. So we planted right in the center of that. And 40 years later, this is our 40-year anniversary here in 2024. And so we finally got land. We've looked for a place for a building. We've been relatively nomadic down there, but we've, maybe decade at a time would find another place for a rental. So we bought, we're building, we'll cut the ribbon. So I wish we had this 30 years ago, but finally, after 40 years, we've got a permanent building. We'll probably keep some of the other rental places going just because we can't fit in this building. We can't even almost fit, but It was intentionally starting right where the students were, and
there was something political going on then too, right?
So 19,
it was not the best time to visit Manila.
It was not the best time to be a tourist.
Yeah.
But it was absolutely the best time to plant a church.
Yeah.
When it was the end of the Marcos regime. Marcos was elected several times, and the Philippine economy was very strong, but then abolished all of the term limits and stayed way beyond what he was elected to do. And then the economy started crashing, and then the protests started happening. And so there were 5 to sometimes 25,000 students marching because the palace was in that area.
Yeah.
And mostly students. And so it was political turmoil. It was economic collapse. There were all types of things going on that made people open to the gospel. There wasn't any hope anywhere else.
Yeah.
And so we started in the midst of that. And fortunately, we're able to reach some really radical students who thought they were going to change the nation politically. And when the gospel came in, they realized the human heart is the issue.
Yeah.
We can change political structures, but if we don't change the human heart with the gospel of Jesus, then there's no real change. And so that's been, I guess I look back and go, yeah, it was a tough circumstance, but the perfect storm for a church plant.
Yeah. It was the right environment for people looking for something solid.
Yeah. I mean, we had multiple times when our church was interrupted. You know, this was the heyday of the charismatic movement as well. And so you would hear these stories of the glory cloud rolling into a meeting and like when Solomon's temple's dedicated. And we actually had one of those moments we were renting the Girl Scout auditorium, and Rice Brooks preached 30 straight days, and I did the follow-up with new believers, and that auditorium seated about 600 people, and we would have overflow every night, Monday through Saturday, and kids getting saved. And then my job was to get these whoever responded to the altar call, maybe it's 5 people one night, maybe 100 the next night, and put the foundations in their lives and get them, what are the next steps? So I had them in another room. This is week 2 of this month-long evangelistic event. And people who were non-mystics, probably a dozen people told me about this. When they were worshiping and praying, I took the new people who responded in another room, and in that auditorium, the worship never stopped. And this cloud of God's presence came in, and people who aren't mystics saw it. The mystics always see it, but the non-mystics saw it. I'm going, I missed it. What happened? So I'm going, God, I need to see that, the cloud, the smoke in a meeting. And so a couple of weeks later, once the team left and my wife and I are left behind, we had one of those. I'm preaching in our basement theater down in the U-Belt where the riots are going on, and I think while I'm preaching, it looks like this cloud's coming in, and then people start crying and reacting as it's moving to the front. When it got to me, I'm thinking, I'm powerful. This is happening. Yeah. When it got to me, I realized it was tear gas. There was a riot going on. It's a true story. Wow. People are sobbing, and then it hits me, and I'm like, okay, this is no more God, no more clouds. But that wasn't the only. There were several times we had the cloud, but it was the tear gas because of the riots and the things going on. And there were times when those riots would happen, and our church was a basement of a movie theater, and we would stand out there with megaphones when the police would clash with the rioters, and they're running. We get safe down here. It's safe. Come down here. Yeah. And they would flood in. We would close the door and start preaching. So there was nowhere to go. So perfect time for church.
Amazing. Amazing. And so let's just talk just a little bit about the progression of the church. So you start with these students that you win on they get one on a short-term mission trip. Then what are the steps? Tell me what you did then for the next few years. I know you put a foundation in them, but how did that thing begin to take momentum? How did it begin to grow?
Joe, here's what I mentioned, the book, the 40, it's called the Manila Miracle. Yeah. And then it's 40 sayings and stories. But the subtitle is From a Mission Field to a Mission Force. Yeah. And so I went there to help Rice do an outreach. Yeah. Wasn't a big sense of the call of God. Yeah. I don't know why, but when I got there, the thought hit me, Filipinos will be great missionaries. I figured out really quickly that most of the people we reached spoke 3 languages. English, all the education was in English, Filipino or Tagalog, which is the national language, and then whatever language from the island group they were from. Mm-hmm. So these people already spoke 3 languages, some of them 4. If their parents were from 2 different islands, then they spoke both of those languages. And so linguistically, there's just the culture is used to multiple languages. And so learning another language was relatively easy for Filipinos. Of course, us as Americans, we're by law, we can only speak English if you're born and raised here, especially Texas.
That's right.
Or Tennessee, where I am now. But I started putting together, God sent me here not just to build a church, but a church that would go from a mission field to a mission force. And we, over the years, have made a priority of raising up Filipinos with a world vision. One of the first things we did in our church was put a big world map. When you came down that basement, you're faced with a National Geographic map. And we taught people, when you come to church, you lay hands on the map. According to Psalm 2:8, you ask God for the nations.
Yeah.
And so we've planted churches in over 40 nations with Filipino missionaries. And the pattern is they go, they plant, they reach locals, they raise them up, and then they go to the next nation or they come home.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that takes 2 years, sometimes that takes 10 or 12 years.
Yeah.
But we've sent them in, besides North Korea, and I'm trying to think, there's maybe 3 nations in all of Asia that we have not planted with a Filipino team. Not Filipino churches, but reaching the locals. So when I think about going from a mission field to a mission force, whether that's the neighborhood's a mission field right here, this neighborhood we're in now, that's a mission field.
Right.
Or the campus, which is right down the street, SMU,
right.
That's a mission field. Or the inner city, or whatever the mission field is. I think I was wired to think, how do we go from a mission field to a mission force? And in my mind, there are at least 3 components of that. It's apostolic preaching, and that's what I've appreciated about you and your ministry is you've always had this sense of mission.
Yeah.
And even whether you're a prophet or a pastor or a teacher, it comes out.
Right.
And from the first moment I stepped into this church, there was this mission, this outward, not just, there has to be inward,
right,
but it's inward, into out, not just in to in to in. And so I think there's apostolic preaching. I think there's apostolic prayer, being a house of prayer for all nations. And that's what, again, we were talking yesterday, how one of my most vivid memories of 29 years ago, the first time in your church, coming early for prayer for the nations before I preached on Sunday. And before you preached, it was this people coming early, not to pray for their needs, but to pray for, and there were maps. I remember maps. So there's apostolic preaching, apostolic prayer that goes. And then I think an important thing is apostolic pastors. Yeah. And again, Joe, it's really, I'm describing what you are and how you've built. And there are pastors who, I'm not saying they are apostles, but there's an apostolic way of thinking. And if we look at the apostolic move in the book of Acts, we were talking yesterday about geographic expansion. It was always, sometimes through persecution, sometimes strategically, but one way or the other, there was always from Acts 1 to the end of Acts, there was this constant expansion. Yeah. And I would call that apostolic pastors who are, this is my local church, this is my primary base, but from here, we're going to the next neighborhood. Yeah. We're going, even if it's just the next block or the next nation. And so I think that whole idea, and I don't know how that idea came. I look back, I don't know, but it was an evolving thing, and eventually the phrase from a mission field to a mission force. And so that's what we would tell these Filipino kids is, look, you're the mission field now, but we're here to become a mission force. Yeah. And not just be a mission field for the rest of our lives. Yeah. Where we're always receiving and always taking, but when the mission idea is what we've received, now we're freely giving. Yeah. It's the Abrahamic covenant of, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless you beyond what you could ever imagine, but there's a reason. So you can be a blessing to the nations. Yeah. Yeah. That was sort of those ideas were all mixed up there. So in seed form in the very beginning.
Yeah. And one of the unique things I think about the Filipinos, those guys are all over the world. I mean, almost everywhere you go, there's a Filipino workforce, in our church, we have 4 Filipinos here, right?
Met them all last night.
Exactly. They all came to see you last night, excited about it. And you take almost any city, even in countries that are off limits to Americans, there's a population of Filipinos there. And you go to Canada, Brazil, you name it, they're there. Yeah. And that's pretty unique about a people group, and certainly adds a little weight to an idea that, hey, we want to be a missions force. Yeah.
And part of it is culturally. Mm-hmm. The Philippine culture was shaped by, obviously, the thousands of years of history, but then 400 years of Spanish Catholicism, followed by American influence in education and language, and then the Japanese occupation, World War II. And so it's this mix of all of these cultures. And the Philippines has never been in an aggressive war. They've been in defensive wars, but they're not nationally and governmentally, they're seen as not a threat. And so from the linguistics to the history to the culture to the it all blended to go, okay, there's a mission force waiting to be sent.
Yeah. And what I love about your leadership is that you've always sort of, it seems to me, had a collaborative effort in leadership, though, and it's framed by a couple things. Consistency, we already talked about. I mean, you were consistent from the beginning, but you have a way of making things very clear. And so the clarity that surround, whatever anybody's talking, and you know how it is in the charismatic world. I mean, there's a new idea, new vision, a new, something all the time. But you've been very clear on keeping the main thing. And so I want to talk a little bit about leadership development. Mm-hmm. You just authored a new book on leadership, I think.
Yeah.
Leadership.
The Leadership Runway.
The Leadership Runway. What is it you want to communicate to young leaders about being seasoned and effective as a leader in the body of Christ?
That book, long story short, at 57 years old, 2016, I went back to school. Yeah. I enrolled in Asbury Seminary. I did Reformed Theological Seminary and quit. I did Asia Theological Seminary and quit. Right. I learned what I needed to learn. I didn't care about a degree, so I got it. Now I got busy. But I was, at 57, I knew that at some point in the near future, I would no longer be in the position that I still occupy as the president of Every Nation Churches Ministries. I had successfully transitioned Victory, the church in Manila, to other leaders, to emerging leaders, and they're doing a wonderful job. And I love coaching, and I love being a part of giving my life to help that generation do what they're called to do. But with our global ministry, I didn't have a clue how to do this. And so Asbury's Doctorate of Ministry program offered me a way to do research, guided research in the topic. So for 3 years, I woke up every day thinking about post-founder sustainability. Yeah. And whether it's the business world, the church world, the nonprofit world, missions world, that transition from the founder generation to the next generation is the most precarious and the least successful. Yeah. If that transition works, there's a better chance that the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one works. If that one doesn't, then we're in big trouble. Yeah. And that's why there are so many mega churches in America that were built, and now the successor can't sustain it. They can't maintain it. There are a lot of reasons for that. So this book, The Leadership Runway, came out of basically 3 years of doctoral study it's the hardest book I've ever written because I thought it would be simple to take academic writing and make it useful. Right. It wasn't. So it was really a rewrite. It was really a start. I can hear my oldest son, William, helping edit, and he's going, "Dad, this is dissertation Steve again. Yeah. Erase it, delete it, start over. This isn't going to help anybody. Nobody cares except your committee and academic committee. So that constantly, it was less than encouraging. No, that's terrible. Nobody cares. Get back to what's going to actually help people. So I think it will. But it came down, and I think you're hitting 3 decades here, and God's used you and Nancy to build something amazing. That's the impact is far beyond what you ever thought or what you even understand right now. The impact of it, but what I guess part of the core of what I came out of that with is that no one leads forever. Every leadership position any of us have, someday someone else will have that position. Unless we lead in a way that completely destroys it. There's nothing left to lead. Some people do that.
That's right.
And so that out of desperation at 57, thinking, I don't know what to do next. And so that period of study helped me set a course for the next decade plus of my life. And that really is about 3 things. It's about preparing the next emerging leaders to lead the organization, preparing the organization to be led by non-founders. And boy, that's a lot of work. There's a lot to that. And as founders, and you founded plenty of things, we have to be the ones that make the tough decisions to get this leadable. A lot of times we build things that are unleadable by a non-founder.
That's right.
And if we don't make the hard decisions before we start bringing those leaders in, then they come in and make the decisions that we should have made, and they look like the bad guy. So one thing I learned is I have to be the bad guy. Better for people to get mad at me, and then the next people come in and thank God, than to put them in a position to make decisions that really they shouldn't make. So it's preparing emerging leaders to lead, preparing the organization to be led by emerging leaders, and then it's how do we prepare founding generation to finish strong? And how do we find a place of faithful, godly, anointed service that's not in that same position? In the corporate world, you just fire them.
Right.
In the ministry world, it's family. It's how do we do that?
What do we do with Grandpa? What are we going to do with him? Right. Yeah. I mean, so let's talk about just a minute about being the bad guy. What are some? What do you mean by that? What are some of the situations that you have to deal with that you don't want your emerging leaders to have to handle? What are those?
Budget. There are financial decisions that have to be made. And it's easy and common to leave the emerging leaders with mountains of debt. When David had the vision to build the temple, and then God said, no, you're not going to do it. The vision's from me, but it's not for you. So what did he do? He started preparing financially. He started preparing plans. You look at all that he did. And so he left Solomon with a mission and a vision, but he also left him with a lot of budget. The resources to get it done. And then David went in and started removing some of his team. So Solomon could build his own, but he didn't do it fully. He left some people behind that Solomon had to deal with later. It really became problems. If David had done it, that's what I mean being the bad guy. They weren't bad people. They're people who have served me well that are going to have a hard time serving the next leader, whoever that is. If I look back at the churches that I planted and then passed on, and then I moved on and planted the next one and then passed it on to someone, I could tell certain leaders who were with me needed to come with me for what I was doing next. It wasn't fair for this leader. They work well with me, but they can't. It's not that this isn't a good leader replacing me, or that this person's a bad person.
Maybe they've been around longer. They're older. They've been through more situations with you.
And sometimes it's as simple. Those are all part of it, and it also is gift mix. I'm a teacher at heart. I don't think I'm a very good pastor when it comes to the people side of it. I'm not an evangelist. I'm not prophetic. So I have staffed myself with evangelists. I'm surrounded by evangelists. And if that next person replacing me is more evangelistic, he doesn't need those people. He needs the staff. And so I need to figure out, take him with me, open other doors of opportunity for them. So that it's not bad guys. Maybe it's the wrong word, but I don't need to just a transition is not just the senior leader doing it. It's a whole. There's a whole ecosystem.
It's a team effort, isn't it? Yeah. And so maybe you're talking today to a guy that's like me. You know, I've got Nancy and I founded Trinity Church. We've been the core asset for years of the church, but we got young leaders around us that are at some point are going to take the reins. So what would be the steps for a founder, a guy my age, who's focused on two things really: finishing strong, want to finish everything the Lord's spoken to us, and secondly, preparing this next generation to take what we finish and go to the next level with it.
Yeah.
What are those steps? What would you say to a guy?
The first thing is that leadership pipeline. Of developing a wide scope of emerging leaders. And that's based on calling, first of all, fruitfulness, character. There's a lot of things that go into that. And I'm probably extreme on what I'm about to say, so I don't think it's for everybody, but it was for me. And is that I'm overboard on homegrown leaders versus imports. It's not exclusive because we have had some people God added, but for the most part, it's been people who have grown up. And so there's been there's an understanding of the mission, vision, culture, values, and all that, which makes it harder and easier.
Right.
Okay. But so there's that leadership pipeline. There's also, in terms of the organization, and I know some people don't like that word, but there is an organizational aspect to a church, a movement of church, especially with Trinity. That's not just this place, but there's things going on, and other auxiliary ministries that are going out of it. So it's a complicated organization. We need to bring clarity to what is non-negotiable and what can the next generation change. I have seen transitions happen when that wasn't clear, and a few years later, it's unrecognizable. The mission, the vision, it's gone. But yet, can this? So, and it's different for everyone. But what is bedrock? And I talk a lot and write a lot about flexible structures. Structure's important, but it has to be flexible. And the metaphors Jesus gave about the patch on an unshrunk patch on shrunk clothing, and that's about flexibility when things are contracting. Okay, and then there's the wineskin thing where this is flexibility when things are expanding. And so whether we're shrinking or growing, whether it's a time like COVID where there's contraction, or whether it's a time that we're getting in now where churches are growing explosively, shrinking. The key thing is flexible structures. Can we be flexible, or are we stuck in a way to do things? And so, but the real trick is, someone in your position as a founder, what is flexible and what's not? And that's not the same everywhere. It's really not. So I think those discussions with the core team, but with potential next generation leadership, is very important.
So you've got this leadership pipeline that you're developing, that you're building, because it always seems like it's always in flux. I mean, it's never constant. So you got this group, and then you're beginning to define who we are as a people and what we want to continue to be as a people, even after I'm gone or the founder's gone. We had an issue like this. We had a young seminary trained pastor that I began to disciple and mentor. He became part of the church. He came on staff of the church. Phenomenal guy. He just never was going to do the Spirit-filled piece. Everything else he was nearly perfect on. And relationally, had a phenomenal relationship. He give him the pulpit. He had a great gift. He could teach. He could minister. Fantastic. He was great on leadership development. He every check. Whoops. He doesn't embrace the spiritual.
And that's not going to work at Trinity.
That's right. And so it was literally, it was one of the hardest things to say goodbye to him, just because I liked him so much. But it also it was critical to to the life of the church after I'm gone.
Yeah, and Joe, if a church is really God's plan, and I believe there's room and a need for all different types of expression of church,
Right.
To reach different types of people. I don't believe in cookie cutter churches,
Right.
and you don't either. And so that's where, as the one who had the original vision from God, and whoever that core team is, we've got to figure out we can be flexible here.
Yeah.
Whether that's the way we do our worship musical style, but we're not flexible here.
Right.
Some people wouldn't. It's okay if some people embrace spiritual gifts and the power, and others don't. In some church settings, that's really okay, but not here, not with us.
Not with us.
And what this did with me for the last years, probably the last 6 years, it's forced us to go deep on statements of faith.
Yeah.
What do we actually believe that's non-negotiable?
Yeah.
And if it actually started when we started our seminary, because some of our professors, some were Calvinists, some are Wesleyan.
Mm-hmm.
And they're wanting to be faithful and go, I want to represent our movement properly. So where's the line? And that led us to go, we've been using these generic statements of faith and some historic creeds that are very important, but it's broad evangelical, but it didn't define these. And so we had to go in and go, if you're writing a course that's going to be used in our global ministry in 80 nations, you can't cross this line.
Yeah.
Now, here's orthodoxy.
Yeah.
Certainly that. But now we had to go down, okay, but this is our piece of it.
Yeah.
This is our distinctives.
Yeah.
And so it pushed us into giving, and it was usually the younger leaders asking the older guys like me going, can you guys be clear on, I know I'm allowed in this movement to believe this, but is it okay if I teach it this way? And sometimes the answer was yes, no. Sometimes it was no. You need to teach both sides.
Yeah.
Because we have people, it's okay what you believe.
Yeah.
And you can tell people what you believe, but you can't go, this is dumb, this is right.
Right.
Or because that's misrepresented. So those kind of things forced us in our teaching and preaching ministry with the statement of faith. There were other things that are developing, and it's why I've written the last few books I've written, because I was asked by our global leaders to go, look, can you get this in writing, some of the stories? And what I said earlier with the victory, when the older generation was asking, look, can you write some of these sort of stories people hear all the time or phrases and get the story behind it so the next generation can understand in a deeper way.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. We were talking earlier about storytelling and how important storytelling is, and that especially for the younger generation.
Yeah, because it I don't know if it creates the culture, but it exemplifies the culture. This is who we are. This is how we act. This is why we make the decisions we make. And that's so, I mean, nobody's going to know that as well as the senior guy. And so again, I just go back to the importance, I think, of whomever we're talking to out there, is the importance of clarity, being clear.
Yeah.
And that's almost job one for founders, being very clear about who we are, what we do, what God's called us to, who we're to reach, and because things like style, there's a lot of leeway. I mean, we've got a church. We have two different styles of worship going on, and it fits well within. But we're not going to bend on some other things. People need to be baptized in the Holy Spirit after they're saved. We want to believe in the power and the presence of God. We want to believe in the experience of God, not just the academic knowledge of God, but the knowing Him experientially. Those things like that, if they don't follow in the next generation, then church is going to lose its place in the community. It's going to lose it. It's not going to be different. It's going to be mushy. Yeah, and not different from the rest of the culture out there.
And Joe, one of the ways that I've kind of learned it accidentally to do that is by unapologetic repetition. Mm-hmm. And it what happened a number of years ago. Our campus ministry in the Philippines and increasingly in the States, when they ask me to come speak at something, they go, "We want you to do this and tell these stories." I'm going, I'm so tired of telling that story. I've got this word right here. I really want to preach. No. And here's what one of the guys in Manila said. No, we want grandfather stories. Yeah. Okay? we need, and then they would tell me, sometimes about generosity and miracle provision. Yeah. They go, look, we've heard these stories of your generation. when the offerings are heavy because they're all coins, and when the staff didn't get paid the last 2 weeks, and so we started fasting. He said, our generation doesn't understand that. Can you just tell those stories again, please? Tell those. We don't want your teaching. Just so I've kind of become this old grandfather telling stories.
It's true,
and that's what they need. And so I've realized, okay, that me repeating these things is keeping the culture alive with the story. Now, every now and then they let me preach or teach, but usually they want me to tell the same stories.
Yeah, because there's an organization as huge as Every Nation and Victory. There's bound to be at every meeting people have never heard, right? I mean, or heard pieces of it and like to get the real story.
It's actually a real joy when people come up. Now, who are you?
I'm Steve. I used to be on staff here. That's right.
I preach every now and then here.
Steve, we could go all afternoon. Thank you so much for being with me and being with us. And, I've picked up your book on the leadership runway, and I was reading the first chapter, and I realized this is written for me. He said, I'm looking at that 65-year-old founder who's 30 years in the church. Thought, wow, I'm 64 and got 29 years. This may be to me. So thank you for that. I'm going to read it and heed it. But I'm just so grateful for your friendship, and just so grateful for all the ways that God has used you and Deborah. Your 3 boys are magnificent. You got 2 entrepreneurs. You got a PhD, a church planter, and I saw the picture last night of all those precious grandchildren you got. I don't know about you, but to me, my big burden in life is to make sure that those grandchildren get my spiritual DNA. And so I'm doing several things to do that. I'm using Bibles and making notes in them. By the time I die, I hope to have everyone a Bible. But more importantly is to have those spiritual conversations with them and encourage them in their walk with God, and put dreams in them to do something great for God.
And Joe, while I was in the lobby early before you picked me up this morning in the hotel, and I was on the phone with Deborah, it's exactly what we were talking about. She was talking about forming, and she has this teenage girl that is in our church, and a good friend. Their parents are good friends of ours. She's going, our oldest granddaughter's 10, and this girl's a few years older, really godly girl. And we were talking about that. Can we get a discipleship group set up for this particular person to start mentoring our grandkids, and then not just our grandkids, but others that are that age? And so exactly what we're talking about is how do we get, and it's not just, obviously their parents are doing that too, doing a great job, but that's where the thinking is.
I mean, because, you get to be our age and you realize more than ever, there is an end to all this. And so I want to make sure that we finish strong, and there's no one in my life more important than my children and my grandchildren. And so I know you feel the same way. And then that bleeds off into God's children and God's grandchildren, and we want to create a world for them that they can be effective, successful, joyful, and really do something great for God.
And Joe, last thought. I know we're out of time here, but what Deborah and I said 40 years ago when we planted the church and when we had our first kids, and all the way through, what we've said is we want to build a church that the next generation will love. And so we usually were doing in church in ways that we didn't like. We preferred something else, but we're building it. We're always building a platform for the next generation, not for ours. And so that's how we've done it. And hopefully that'll continue. And from what I have experienced here this weekend, Trinity Church is doing that. Wow. That next generation needs the supernatural presence of God like we experienced last night. And so well done. I'm excited to see how this vision that we were talking about yesterday rolls out.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us. Appreciate you being here today. And Pastor Steve, God bless you. Let me just offer a word of prayer. Lord, I thank you for Pastor Steve, Lord, for everything that he has his hands to. I thank you, Lord, that you've given him the grace to finish strong. And Lord, I thank you that you've given him influence, Lord, to help and to encourage pastors and leaders all over the planet to finish strong. Lord, I bless him And thank you for him in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, Steve.
All right.
God bless you. Thank you for joining us.